So the roots of progressivism start in the late 1800s and the early 1900s with presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. So it really doesn't have a party boundary. It's within the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And Teddy Roosevelt actually left the Republican Party to form the Bull Moose Party. And that's really how the progressive movement got a lot of its start. And then Woodrow Wilson became president, and he pushed a lot of progressive ideas like the Federal Reserve, progressive taxation, and higher taxes.
And now the neoconservative movement, or ideology, is more of a relatively new way of thinking, at least in the US, but it kind of stems from a timeless idea that a powerful nation should use its military prowess to expand upon its ideas and spread them to foreign nations, which is something you've seen throughout history. And this idea really only started to show up in the US in the force that we see today in the early 1970s. It culminated with the election of the two Bushes, who are basically the face of this movement, and today it's widely considered to be the controlling ideology in the Republican Party.
Well, yeah, I think when you even look at the Republican field, a lot of them are neocons when you actually get down to the issues. And same thing with the Democrat Party. A lot of them are progressives. And when you actually look at the two of them side by side, there's a lot that they agree on.
Exactly. Now, essentially, neocons are considered to be the stereotypical Republican, and a lot of times progressives are considered to be the stereotypical Democrat. But when you really break it down, they're not as different as a lot of people assume, as the same 5 basic ideas that define them today is kind of exactly what they have in common.
Right.
Now, you'll see that they both in recent years have been for military action abroad, mainly in the Middle East. They both have been pushing big government with acts like the NSA and the Patriot Act.
Well, hold on. I want to go to the Middle East, because when you actually look up what a progressive is, it says that they are anti-war. But it's funny because Obama ran on that stance, pulling troops out, but he actually bombed more countries than George Bush did during his presidency. And Hillary Clinton, if we remember, she was for the Iraq war because she believed Iraq had WMDs. So, I mean, they actually really, if you look at them on paper, they try to be different, but in ideology and how they act politician-wise, they are very similar in foreign policy.
Another thing that the two parties tend to be for is a progressive tax system, which is what we see in America today. And as well as, believe it or not, they both seem to have agreed on healthcare and its socialization in the US, and they arguably only use social issues to appeal to their voter fan base. Now, when you look at these similarities together, you realize that though the Republicans and Democrats seem different, the controlling ideology in both parties is very similar. And there's a term for this, it's called a false dichotomy, which is where you appear to have a choice in which all options cover all possible options in a scenario, but in reality, the choices you're given are all about the same, and the true choice, it just simply isn't there because you're limited to what is essentially the same, just in different formats.
Right.
Now let's break these down one by one. The first idea is using military action in foreign countries, mainly in the Middle East in recent years. And there's not really much to say for this for neoconservatives. It's kind of a defining stance of how they
Basically nation build in the Middle East.
Exactly. That's kind of how the neoconservative movement was founded, which we talked about earlier.
Well, I would even venture to say that it's basically we're going back to the age of imperialism. We're imposing our military beliefs and even our democracy beliefs on other nations who don't really want that.
Yeah, and now that might be bringing it a little bit too far, but in essence, that is what the neoconservative movement is it not? But a lot of people are under the impression that the progressives are against this, and Obama ran on taking troops out of the Middle East. But
he ran
really
as a dove and essentially a hawk. I mean, he's bombed 7 countries in the 7 years he's been president, and he's been running guns to a lot of Middle Eastern countries. A lot of us remember that Hillary Clinton was originally for the Iraq war because she believed that there were WMDs in Iraq, and she supported that. So a lot of these so-called progressives who say that they're anti-war and they're doves, they're just as much behind war as any neocon.
So the next topic that the two agree on is the expansion of government, mainly in things like the NSA and the Patriot Act.
A lot of security.
Exactly. And now a lot of Republican voters, and a lot of people are under the impression that the Republican Party is against a larger government. But that simply isn't the case, because Bush was the one who enacted the Patriot Act.
Right.
And we saw someone like Rand Paul, who's tried to stand up to the NSA, and
the establishment just
the
crashed
Republicans
down on him. Yeah.
Many of the Republicans and self-proclaimed neocons were strongly against this, and he was essentially ostracized from the party for it.
Yes. And I think even with the Democrat Party, the progressives generally stand for the NSA too. You see a lot of them, they voted in favor of the Patriot Act and what the NSA is doing, collecting our records. But a few Democrats did stand up and say that they are against it. I know the senator of Oregon spoke during Rand's filibuster, Ron Wyden, and he's been pretty vocal about their overreach.
And now the next one is a bit of a stretch, but progressive tax, which you'd assume would be only within the progressive ideology.
Well, yeah, that's where it came from. It came from progressives like Woodrow Wilson. He's the one who got the ball rolling on that.
But neoconservative legends like the Bushes have made no attempts to end a progressive tax issue, and even the Bush tax cuts, which a lot of people against it tried to say that it was directing us toward a flat, or I guess people for it were also saying it was directing us towards a flat tax. When you look at it, it only made a bigger gap between various tax brackets.
Well, it's funny. The neocons and the Republicans run as they're against redistribution of wealth, right? But the progressive tax is redistributing wealth, essentially, because, the rate, you're charging a higher percentage for people who are rich.
And I've seen very few Republicans, and certainly no neocons, propose anything to actually eliminate this. So it seems like they're pretty much agreeing that it's the way to go for this country.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, like we were saying, this is a progressive idea, and this has been around since the early 1900s, and this is essentially what all the Democrats are for, just a lot more. I mean, Bernie Sanders is open to the idea of taxing the wealthy 90% of their income. So, yeah, I mean, it's basically the progressive tax on steroids when you look at the left.
The next idea we're going to compare is the topic of healthcare, mainly its socialization in the U.S. And now the Republican Party, especially under the Tea Party name, which, again, isn't the neoconservative, have ran Let's Repeal Obamacare. But when you look at it, and even on their website, on GOP.gov, they state that they're strongly against a socialized healthcare. Yet, they've really not made any steps besides stating that they're against it. And I've seen a lot of arguments for the fact that they're only doing it for votes. And that's enough in my mind to say, if they're not necessarily for it, they're clearly not strongly against it, because even when they control the House, they're not doing anything to get rid of it.
They control the House and the Senate now.
Exactly. And I've seen no strong, full-hearted movements to eliminate socialized healthcare, which is really a new system, so it's not that embedded into our lifestyle that it can't be removed.
Right, and again, this was a very progressive idea that was hatched out of, from Obama and actually Hillary. It dates back to when Hillary was, in the White House with Bill, and this was essentially her big idea for socialized healthcare. So it dates back to the 90s, but I mean, you can trace socialized medicine from, even in Europe, from decades ago. So this is a very progressive idea.
The final comparison we're going to make today is their use of socialist use to adhere to their voter base. And we see definitely the neocons adhere to the Christian beliefs of the majority of I'm not going to say majority, a decent amount of Republican voters.
Right.
The Republicans and neoconservatives have been for traditional marriage and very conservative on drug legalization, and a lot of it
abortion too.
Yeah, abortion, and all these issues, they clearly adhere to what their voter base has agreed with, as long as, in modern history of the Republican Party.
Right, they more or less target the evangelicals and, the social conservatives, whereas the progressives and Democrats tend to target, they play the, Republicans are against women's rights.
Yeah, exactly.
They pull that card all the time. And, they are for abortion and, legalization of marijuana and gay marriage.
And on both sides, you see a lot of flip-flopping on this issue, because they're really... A lot of candidates are really just trying to keep their voter base, and they're trying to just get elected, and They don't care about social issues. It's a way to get elected.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thanks for watching this video. I hope that we showed you guys that the neoconservatives and the progressives have their roots in a very similar ideology and a very similar way of getting elected. And that there are other choices and ideologies out there. You don't have to stick to the mainstream, typical Republican or typical Democrat.
Yeah.
So if you like this video, please add a like, maybe comment that we're completely wrong and idiots, and be sure to subscribe. So thanks.